It's so interesting with Abby when she was young. I just remember her being such an energetic dog and having such an abundance of energy. And now that she's gotten older and Ruby's kind of stepped up to the plate and taken over a lot of that, it's quite funny to see actually.
Yeah, it's no different. I think they're very similar dogs, and same amount of energy, same amount of everything. Actually, I think the one difference though is Abby was probably a little bit more obedient. This one has got a bit of a mind of its own at this stage, but I'm sure she'll come right.
No, that's good. And then we sort of talk about that and the differences. Like, you're obviously my dad. We've taken different paths in our careers. I work in marketing. You work more in sales and business development. Was that something that you always saw yourself doing when you were younger?
Well, look, I started selling at a very early age. When I was about 5, I started my first little business at home. It was on the room, street-facing room out on the porch. I bought a whole lot of books and pencils and erasers and things like that. And yeah, I used to encourage kids at school to buy, my parents to buy some of my stuff. So selling for me started at a very young age.
Our guest today is Peter Macadam. He is an international business development specialist and salesman, selling over $1 billion worth of product in his lifetime. Hmm. What are some of the common challenges that come with selling, and how have you learned and navigated your way through some of those big challenges?
There's a lot of telling out there, but there's not a lot of selling. So people tend to babble on a lot about something that they're trying to, encourage people to buy, and that's not necessarily a good thing because people get fed up. They really just want you to get to the point. So if you have a story to tell, make sure you know everything about your product. Make sure you know what the competitors' products are and you know what they're up to, and then try and find out what the customer wants. Without knowing what the customer wants, I think the whole meeting and trying to sell something is a waste of time. So you have to figure out a lot of things while you're prepping to actually sell your product to somebody. So find out what they want, find out what they have, find out all the reasons, they bought something previously, if they have in fact bought something, and then hone in more and more and try and get them on board with what it is that you have. Once you have all of that, I think it just makes life a lot easier for you, and then you can get the commitment that you actually want. But to babble on regardlessly and not know much about your product is a complete and utter waste of time. And I've seen it so many times in my career. That's one of the biggest challenges.
It's so interesting when you have a look at a lot of people that have gone on to build successful businesses and their ability to sell, and also that entrepreneurial spirit which they had at a young age. And that was something which sort of came out to you a lot later on, because you initially qualified as a pharmacist and spent some time in pharmacy and then moved towards sort of sales and entrepreneurship. Could you just explain a bit more about that journey and how you ended up going from a pharmacist to a small business owner?
So a lot of the stuff I could have done, I suppose, as an entrepreneur could have happened if I had back then opened a pharmacy. But what I learned earlier on with pharmacy, and very early on actually, was that I didn't really like sick people that much. That might come as a shock to a lot of people. I don't mind serious illness, but the trivial stuff pharmacists tended to see: snotty noses, bumps and bruises, sore stomachs, etc. Wasn't really all that appealing to me. And having had that bent for selling, I thought, well, there has to be something else. And if you look when you're young and you look at different industries, you tend to see bigger companies as those with the most opportunities if you are wanting to, work for somebody. If you're wanting to work for yourself, I mean, that's a different story. Then you have to identify something that you could be passionate about, maybe a hobby or something that you have an interest in, motor cars, something like that, furniture. One of the things I was interested in when I started off was I've always been interested in restoring furniture. And, I used to speculate with bits and pieces of furniture, restore them on the weekends. Back then, we didn't have kids, so it was a lot easier. We had a lot of time. And I'd restore a piece, sell it, make a profit, buy another two pieces, restore them, sell them, buy three pieces. And that's how my first business actually started. It started as a hobby. And, the hobby became a business after a while. And I soon realized that there was an opportunity. It was something people wanted back then. It was fashionable. And there was a captive market for me. And, that hobby became a business, became a very successful business. The biggest challenge I think entrepreneurs face is a lot of them think they can work in the business and not on the business. I think you have to make a distinction between in the business and on the business. So when you start out, it's fine to work in the business, and I did a bit of that. I still used to continue restoring furniture and doing things that eventually workers of mine that I employed were doing. But, I was always mindful of the expenditure thing. So the revenue that came in had to sustain me. It had to sustain the business. I had to have enough cash to pay my staff. But at the same time, you can't always do same old, same old. You have to diversify in retail, which we did. So we started with furniture, and then we moved on to decor and all kinds of other things. But always at the back of my head was, what is it that people want? What do I need to do to make them or buy what I had, to move them, and to get that commitment? But at the same time, you want to make a profit. And I think that is the secret in business, is to always get that win-win, with customers. So, it wasn't easy in the beginning. It never is, I think, for entrepreneurs. However, always at the back of your head should be what comes in needs to be bigger than what goes out.
That's a good point, because especially going into business, there's a lot of overnight success stories or companies that have grown phenomenally fast, like Facebook and some of these other big tech companies. And what's very often missed is the companies that don't succeed. These companies that have been in tourism in like the last 2 years, for example, that may have been going for decades but folded because they've relied too much on international tourism, or companies that are in retail and hospitality and over leverage themselves with capital whilst not sort of spending within their means. And I found it very interesting looking in the digital marketing sphere how many businesses there are right now that still fail to actually diversify themselves as a company. And what you touched on there with diversifying yourself, is that something that carried across into the sphere of having a broad customer base as well, and sort of going beyond what most people would traditionally associate with furniture customers?
Is, people latch onto an idea. They might be good entrepreneurs, good at what they do. However, often they choose the wrong products. You have to know what it is that people want at a point in time. And I think you pointed out correctly that there are big companies that are very good at that, like Facebook and some of the other big corporates, Onteras of this world and other big companies. However, when you're a small business guy and a small entrepreneur starting off, you need to focus on a niche market. You need to have something that people genuinely want and that there is a demand for. However, it needs to be at a price level that is going to be attractive to customers. If something is too expensive, there's resistance. If it's too cheap, uh, there's not resistance, but people disregard it. They think it's poor quality and there must be something wrong with it. So you have to hit that happy medium pricing. But at the same time, you also need to have something that is relatively unique. Don't start off with 1,000 different products, if you're starting off in a small business, because it's almost like an Aladdin's cave. You walk into this cave of treasures, and where do you start? A lot of people know a lot about a little. And I think that's good entrepreneurial thinking. If you know a lot about a little, that's actually very good. Because if you know a little about a lot, that's pretty hopeless. People are not going to appreciate your skills. They're not going to appreciate what it is that you're selling. And, you have to be careful with businesses. Whatever skill it is that you're offering, make sure you know a lot about it. But don't try and over diversify. Hit one thing, make a success of it, and then move on to the next thing. And, that's how we conducted our business when we started. Back then, we started with restored furniture, and then we moved on from that. We started producing reproduction furniture, so copies of the furniture that we were selling, which was period style oak furniture. And then from there, we thought, well, where next? What else can we add to complement this range of stuff that we had? Then we moved on to some upmarket gifts, some glassware that complemented what we had. We moved into brass, copper, that complemented what we have. And then we thought, well, there's so much out there. What else can work? We moved into leather lounge suites. And it just grew and grew and grew. But at each stage of the growth, we knew exactly what it was that we wanted, and we knew a lot about the product that we added to the range. So we didn't put in 1,000 different products there and know very little about them. And each one we added, or sometimes there was a range of stuff we added. We tested the market, at the same time. And if it worked, we added to it, complemented it. If it didn't work, we withdrew it. And I think you have to be very strict about that in business. If something works, pursue it. If it doesn't work, yes, you can try again in a different way, but never ever continue with something that's a dead dog.
Yeah, and that's the kind of thing that you find a lot in on that TV show Dragon's Den, where people come in with these elaborate and wonderful ideas that they think is going to absolutely flood the market and make the dragons millions and them even more millions. But very often they haven't thought through properly how much it's going to cost to put that into the marketplace to begin with, and then also to sort of grow and scale beyond that as well. And some of these ideas just aren't tenable at all. Like there was one fellow who came on one time and he literally had a blinker light warning people not to drive in a particular direction, and he was said to the dragons that he wants to hang it up next to all the road signs of do not go in, no entry or anything like that, and just have like a red sign flashing. And he's just like, it's going to change lives, it's going to save lives, it's going to change the world. And everyone's just looking at this guy as like, you've lost your mind, mate. Like you actually just don't know what you're talking about. And I think with international business as well, people who haven't operated in that environment and aren't accustomed to people who are from different cultures can sometimes get a bit of a shock when they go into a negotiating room thinking that they're going to start talking there and then, when it could be a situation where they have, tea or coffee or a really long lunch and possibly even dinner, or go to a wedding or something like that. And then the negotiation starts after all of that. And that would have been something that you've probably come across quite a bit because you moved to New Zealand in 1997. You got started working in international business, I believe, in 2001. How was that change working within domestic markets, with first in South Africa, then in New Zealand when you came here? going international, and sort of what were the things that you really had to adapt quickly to?
Well, coming to New Zealand was a challenge in itself. It's a different country, it's a different culture. And, at the time we arrived in New Zealand back in the mid 90s, it wasn't exactly a prospering, wealthy country. There were some solid industries in this country, though. The dairy board produced some wonderful dairy products through various companies that they marketed products on behalf. So when my opportunity came to join Fonterra, actually the dairy board back then, it was an opportunity in pharmaceutical lactose. And pharmaceutical lactose is an ingredient that gets used to make tablets and capsules. So it was for me a good fit, first of all. Secondly, the international side was completely different to what I'd ever experienced. I had never really traveled much up until then. Uh, Elise and I had traveled abroad, for an OE when I was still in South Africa. That was a holiday. I wasn't conducting any business at that time. So when I joined the dairy board in New Zealand, it was a huge, step for me because suddenly I was thrown out in the big wide world. There were different customers, and back then we traveled the world. We were in South America, we were in Europe, Central Asia, Asia, all over the place. And I think where I really honed in my selling skills, though, was in Arabia. The Arabian countries and the subcontinent countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, have the most amazing negotiators. They know what they want, and most of the time they actually get what they want. Whether that's good pricing, uh, different products, volume of stock it is that they want, they tend to get it. So the secret in that business is always to portray the value of your product, and secondly, portray its scarcity, and never ever come across like you're hard up to sell your product. And even if business is shocking and people ask you, how is business? How's it going? Your answer should be, it's going fantastically. We really don't have enough stock to sell. So the secret I had always was to portray exactly that. That scarcity, the quality, the value for money that these guys are getting, and never ever, to sacrifice on pricing unless you got something in return.
Hmm.
And you never ever dropped your pants on a deal.
What was some of the you talked about those negotiating tactics that the Arabian countries and also subcontinent countries, people that live there used. Can you sort of elaborate more on some of the tactics and approaches that they would take to try and get a good deal?
When markets like dairy go up in price at these auctions, what you tend to find is you have a lot of friends out there suddenly. The guys want to do long contracts. They're all over you like a rash. It's if you're their long lost buddy. When those markets tip and start falling, it's a different story. All the rats leave the ship, and suddenly you're stuck there with a warehouse full of stock you cannot sell. So you need to be stealthful and cunning and quick. But what these guys had was they knew that market pretty well, and when prices were going up, they knew how much stock to buy. They knew where to buy it, and they were not scared to play one supplier off against another. That was their biggest trick. If they couldn't get from us, they'd always say, Pete, I'm sure we can get the stuff in Europe cheaper, or the United States has got cheap skim milk powder. The counter for that would always be, yes, that might be the case at this point in time. However, who's more reliable here? Who's who's more credible in terms of quality and who is going to grow your business sustainably. And you have to really hone in on, what is it that you need for me to do to make your business grow and be sustainable. And, this is sustainability part is a buzzword. I mean, everybody's talking about sustainability nowadays, but it's important. If your business is not sustainable, you're just not going to grow and you're not going to last out there. And you have to value sell. And I think that's where New Zealand always was, very fortunate in that it has products that have value. And they always perceived New Zealand as a quality destination. And that's how we managed to get good pricing versus EU or Americans that had lots of product from time to time, but they were never there all the time. And I think that made a big difference as well, getting higher pricing. Yeah.
So when you started working at Lactose New Zealand down in Taranaki, was there already established business relationships, or did you have to go out and build some new ones on top of it, or was it a combination of both?
That was probably mostly maintaining existing business. There was a little bit of business development, of course. However, it was mainly servicing existing customers with existing products. There was not a lot of new business development, and certainly not a lot of innovation and new product development at that time.
When you moved to the United States, which we'll come to, that obviously would have been something where, the actions that you really had little control over, like where you were living growing up, would come into play a lot later on, wasn't it?
But when I arrived there, Stuart, there was nothing. There was no paperwork, there was no laboratory, there was no refinery. Nobody had a clue about this pharmaceutical lactose that this company wanted to produce. But what they did know was that they had some good people on board. They had people that could put a business plan together, and people that were ambitious and wanted to do something great. So it took about 18 months from when I arrived there until we actually started producing the first pharmaceutical lactose, for selling. But the groundwork that went into that, the market research, the travel, the questioning of different customers, the strategizing was second to none. It was probably one of the hardest jobs I think I've ever had. And up until then, I was pretty good at selling, but I didn't have much pure marketing experience back then. And that was before all the digital stuff that guys like yourself are, involved in. So we had a different way of marketing. We still, it sounds old-fashioned, but we had brochures. We had, a corporate DVD that we set up that we translated into different languages, to give customers an idea of who the company was. But the American bit in my career was a big feather in my cap because when I arrived there, there was nothing. And by the time I left there, they were selling millions of dollars worth of pharmaceutical grade lactose. And, it was an achievement, honestly. It was one of the best jobs I've ever had. And in terms of career, it was a fascinating place to be in at that point in time.
I think just as a country in general, it's such a fascinating place because the opportunities that you have to build and grow and develop, I think, are so much more advanced than what New Zealand can ever produce, just because not only the size of the country, but also just the mindset which Americans have as well. And one of the things that I quickly discovered was a rather terrible stereotype that um, a lot of people I knew had of Americans was that they were fat, lazy, and unambitious people. And that couldn't have been anything further from the truth. Like, they were hardworking, enterprising people. And if you achieved something good, like, you made the winning basketball shot, or you got an A plus in your maths test, or, you did $1 million deal, which had never been done before, like, they celebrated that. They congratulated you. And that's something which is so good about them, is that they've got a culture of celebrating success, which I think New Zealand is still struggling to overcome. Like, there are pockets within the business community where that does happen, but I don't think it happens enough. And that's something which, sadly just needs to, be improved at some point. And there needs to be a discussion about actually celebrating people that have done great things, rather than just having this tall poppy syndrome and just chopping them down.
The Americans were very open-minded when it came to business, and if something could make money for them, they were keen. As long as you had a good plan and it was practical and workable, they put it into motion. And one of the differences also in the United States versus New Zealand is that the state governments there had a lot of funding available for new ventures. So the pharmaceutical lactose business that Hilmar, the company I work for, set up was one of those type businesses where the state of California offered them a huge amount of money to assist them to build a lactose refinery, to assist with the marketing, the travel budgets that we had back then. It was amazing. I mean, resources second to none.
How did you even go about developing business for a product that wasn't yet being made? And what was that process to go and, sort of go and call people and knock on doors with people and go travel to people? Like, who people in what companies and what were their roles? Like, um, how did all of that work?
There are different types of pharmaceutical grade lactose that you use in different processes to manufacture tablets and capsules. And, we had to quickly assess how we were going to do business. Were we going to deal with multinational companies? Were we going to deal with generic manufacturers of tablets and capsules? And, we had to put a strategy together that was going to bring quick runs on the board. You don't want to go through an approval process that takes years and years, to get approval, and then they give you a small volume of lactose because they don't necessarily trust you yet. So we went a different route. We went the generic route. They were bigger volume, quicker approvals, and it was a fascinating time for me because I traveled the world and I had to get around to as many drug companies in as many different countries as possible to ask all the questions that needed asking. Where are you currently buying stuff from? Why are you buying that? Would you be prepared to change to something that we make? What needs to be done to make it happen? And so in the 18 months that I'm talking about that it took from when I arrived there until we started making, the first lactose, a lot of water flowed under the bridge in terms of market development. What model were we going to use? Were we going to set up distributors globally that have their own warehouses? Were we going to sell directly to customers? Were we going to have indent business, which really means we sell directly to a customer and a distributor gets a percentage commission? So there were different things that we had to consider. However, at the end of all of the market research, the travel, we had to get commitments. And, you quickly manage to see who is committed to change. There are always those folk that are willing to give you a chance, but they need to see a benefit. If you don't see a benefit in a business, why would you change? I mean, if you're happy with something, what on earth is going to make you change? And my job was always to put those doubts in their minds as to, have you really got the best for your business at this point in time? How about you try us and see if we can give you something better and add value to your business? And people are always willing to look at that, but there needs to be a benefit. And so I sell on the benefits.
It's very interesting. You came back to New Zealand end of 2005, worked for a couple of different companies, including one where you were managing, again, an international business portfolio for a dairy company that was absolutely enormous and, again, involved a lot of international travel. How had your approach changed in that time from leaving Hilmar Cheese to stepping into this role where you were managing such a large portfolio and working some pretty crazy hours too?
So it was busy 24/7, 365 with these guys, making offers and trying to get the deals done. The company I worked for at that stage was Westland Milk Products, and they were extremely busy all across the globe, just like it was when I was with the dairy board. A similar number of countries. It would have been upwards of 60, 65 different countries globally, selling all kinds of different commodities, not only pharmaceutical lactose like it was with Fonterra and the dairy board. It was butter and proteins and milk fats and different milk powders, etc. So it was an extremely busy job. Uh, but at the end of it all, every deal that you did where you made some money gave you a buzz. And I think some of those deals were multi-million-dollar deals, and that truly gives you an enormous buzz as a salesperson. There was a little bit of business development that went on as well with that company. However, it was mainly maintaining business and growing incremental business with existing customers. At that stage, Hilmar was completely different. It was business development 101 from the beginning, and then we built up something. Whereas when I came back here, it was more a case of maintaining business again and growing incrementally.